We will start in momentarily. We're waiting on two speakers and a few more guests to come on in. Thanks for your patience. Please make sure your microphones are muted. Thanks. Hey, Jason, how are you?
How's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
Happy. What? It's like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday or Sunday. They're all the same now. I don't
Is Blur's Day? Yes.
someday.
Just waiting on Graham. We'll get started soon.
Graham is here.
Graham. Okay. Sorry, didn't see you there, brother. I'm going to pin you so I can see you. Thank you, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Always enjoy seeing people's backgrounds in their home working environments. It's sort of one of my favorite.
Yeah. You learn a lot about people during these couple of weeks.
You learn a lot about the stuff people have going on in their own little personal world.
Right? Okay. All right. We'll start in about a minute or two, as I see the kind of numbers are jumping on the bottom. Thanks everybody for coming with us today, but specifically Luis, Graham, Ryan, and Jason. During this time, there's a lot of movement underfoot and a lot of uncertainty, but I think overall, I think we're getting good information from the state leadership, the medical leadership, our city, and they're finally experts and adults at the table. But as it relates to the thing that I think that all of us signed up for in this life, building high growth companies, I thought it would be best to speak to the actual people building those and kind of navigating through these uncertain times. And we certainly have four of the best in the country with us today. So I'm really humbled and honored that we have these guys on with us. This is meant to be kind of from the trenches. So to kind of set the scene for today's talk, I'm going to go and ask each of our guests just to kind of give us a sense of where, to level set, where were you kind of going into March, early March, or excuse me, late Feb, early March when this all started? Graham, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Good news for Roadrunner. We completed our Series C $29 million raise at the beginning of February. So timing, couldn't have been more perfect at that. That wasn't planned. But so what that means is come late February, we were ready to really grow. So we started hiring, aggressively. We built out a recruiting department. And then what's funny is it became very clear to us that I think our March 23rd hiring class was 35 people.
Wow.
And, 2 weeks prior, we had made a decision to work from remote. So, the planning became quickly, okay, are we doing this, right? And if we're doing this, how are we going to onboard these new employees? And so we brought them all on, but it was a shift to, getting them their equipment and down to HR items. So I think the team all in all pivoted really nicely in a crisis situation for us. And so that was the immediacy of the decision making. And then I think thereafter, obviously we had April, May, June hiring classes because we're opening cities across the country. And so we're really still in planning on what the next step is after Austin starting in June and what hiring is going to be like. But yeah, it was definitely a period of probably 5 to 7 days of just figuring out the virtual onboarding of 35 people.
Okay. Luis, how about you? How were things looking in February?
Well, things were looking fine in February. What's interesting is that we should have known this was coming. I honestly, I was pretty clueless. We have an office in Beijing and we had to close it in, mid to late January. Our traffic from China doubled in mid to late January. And somehow I just thought this would be, it was a fluke. It didn't occur to me that this would happen here in the United States or you know, in the West. So we were chugging along pretty cluelessly. And then, you know, this whole thing started happening. We started working remotely pretty early on. The whole company went remote. And it's been maybe almost 5 weeks now. And that's what happened. I would say the transition to remote was much better than I expected. I thought it was going to be a complete, you know, goat rodeo, but it wasn't. I actually think we're about equally productive. I'm not worried that people are just working too hard, because we have a lot of people who basically live alone and they have nothing better to do than to work. So, you know, that's ultimately, I don't think that's very good. I mean, it's short-term good, long-term bad. Yeah, that's that. Fortunately, this has, you know, been, you know, this is kind of like it's terrible to say because it's like survivor's guilt, but fortunately, this has been very good for our business. So our we probably our revenue has increased by about 50% and has remained like that, and we expect it to remain like that because that happened in China and it's still like that. I mean, it's been 3 months of you know, China basically doubled for us, and it's been 3 months like that, and it doesn't seem like it's going to go down.
Wow. Jason, what's been your experience since February?
I mean, so sort of similar. I think we saw some of this just given the schools sort of trying to figure out the online learning piece. We, from a company standpoint, like we're already sort of more than almost half remote. So everything we do sort of has to be remote first anyway, since we've got about sort of almost half the company sort of scattered. And so that transition wasn't that bad. The biggest problem is obviously, you know, all of our school districts in the country just sort of, you know, you hit pause on and everybody's sort of trying to figure out. I mean, at the end of the day, like we try and straddle this line of how do you be sort of empathetic that teachers are trying to figure out how to get all of their classrooms online. And then we have a bunch of districts who are trying to figure out, you know, what is the training structures that they use for all this. And, you know, none of the teacher pipeline sort of talents, none of the master's degree equivalency stuff we're doing. All of that, the realities are still the same. So I think in the medium, so we haven't really lost anything in the process. It's mostly just been, everything's been paused. And then we're trying to, you know, things will sort of get kicked out a quarter probably. And then ultimately I think things will probably accelerate even more from there. And so it's been a little bit sort of just crazy in terms of trying to, we did raise, fortunately, sort of a nice round, sort of a teeny round just to get us through to break even. I think it will ultimately get us to toward the beginning of the year. So we've been able to sort of weather that and sort of feel like we're in a decent place as we move forward here.
Okay. And Ryan, I know similarly, you had just announced a raise prior to this situation. Can you tell me how you were feeling and how things were looking in February?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we were in a similar boat as Graham was, not from the same notional size, but I think from a timing standpoint, going into the beginning of February, we had just closed a $3.3 million C+ round. And so for us, it was, I think we were also in the same boat as Luis, where we saw these things happening in China and other places, as many of us saw, but didn't really expect this to really take over the US the way that it has. You know, in our space, as we're operating within the on-demand mobility space, particularly catered to the ride-sharing space. And so when we think of what's happening with ride shares, a lot of these cities are kind of going on lockdown here. We've seen just a drastic decline in rideshare activity. So really going from that transition from February to March, it's like we started to see as we started to see particular cities go on lockdown, New York, San Francisco, we could start to see that rideshare trend, kind of rideshare activity trend, go down from our driver perspective. And so for us, it became a really quick adjustment from our end. Operationally, I think was fine in transitioning to remote, but really we've had delivery, so utility for the delivery segment on our roadmap for some time, but really we took everything that was related to delivery drivers, so that you think the Postmates, DoorDash, Grubhub, Instacart, et cetera, and move that all to the front of the roadmap. And so, like, everything that is related to adding value to delivery needs to be prioritized, and everything else gets pushed to the back burner. So making that shift has put us in a pretty good place, and we've seen growth in revenue month over month and through this situation since we've been on lockdown. So, we're monitoring things on a week by week, month by month basis. But overall, this shift is really the prioritization of delivery has really kind of put us in a decent place there.
Okay. And then once the news started to happen and kind of as it's developed, what operational changes have you made? Luis, I'll let you start kind of on the proactive and reactive steps you've taken.
I mean, well, the biggest one was all of us going, working from home. Our HR team has done a really, really good job trying to make sure that, we've put in a lot of things to make. We have a number of employees, I mean, as I'm sure everybody would, who are, there's a lot of anxiety, I think, going on. And so we've tried to put in a lot of things. I mean, one of the changes we did is, in particular, we're worried about parents. Their kids are at school, and they're like they're having a real trouble. So one of the things we immediately did was we told people, look, don't take PTO, just do what you can. So don't, we have 20 days of PTO. We said don't spend that. Just basically do what you can. If you can't work one day, just doesn't matter. So we basically just told people, we don't, we understand that you're having to juggle a lot of things. So just don't worry about having to report PTO unless you're actually on legitimate vacation. Don't bother reporting PTO. Not many people are on legitimate vacation right now. No. So we did that. And basically we did a lot of kind of people changes. We talked a lot about having empathy. We just have all kinds of different employees. I mean, from the people who just live alone, who we're worried about because we're worried about them being just lonely, to people with families who, we're worried about being able to juggle the whole thing. So we've really told people to have a lot of empathy. From a business standpoint, everything remained the same. The only thing we did is we actually did some small changes to our marketing. We actually increased our marketing spend because prices for a lot of things are lower. Prices for a lot of ads are lower. And since people have an appetite for learning a language now, we actually increased our marketing spend. But that's about all the things we did.
Okay. Jason, you make any operational changes as this news has come in and since?
I mean, for better or worse, we actually had our sort of quarterly lead sort of offsite already scheduled, and so we ended up just doing it remote. I think it's actually been sort of nice in that we sort of have everybody take stock in their teams of sort of all of the stuff that just gets pushed off for months at a time. And so I had a bunch of people, so we sort of build a bunch of lists on, so like, here's the stuff that we need to try and true up in terms of marketing collateral, in terms of other things that we're just sort of trying to work through. And so there's been a little bit of a chance to just sort of go get some of that stuff done. You just run in so fast that you just don't have a chance to, that whole sort of tech debt, all of the operational tech debt, we've been able to sort of try and work through. But that's what I think been most people's sort of focus is just like, what are the things we can do so that we, if and when the world goes back to whatever the new norm is, that they can be ready for it. That's what people have been mostly focused on. It's not worth trying to communicate with customers at the moment unless they're pinging us. So we just sort of try to let everybody sit.
Okay. Wow. And Graham, I mean, you're serving the it's a B to G dynamic. They seem to have their hands full. What changes have you guys made?
Yeah, I think what was interesting with what took place in the waste and recycling industry, because it's life-sustaining, essential. You had some industries that we serve that are busier than ever: health services, senior care, multifamily. All the generation of materials shifted really to those places.
Wow.
Then you had other industries that are ghost towns: school and universities, restaurants, hotel. So there was a lot of effort in outreach to customers immediately, saying, look, let's get your services and levels where they need to be. Here's what we think they're going to be. So we were very proactive about that. That was probably the operational focus. And then the people focus, I think it's a lot similar to what you're hearing. Very focused on communication daily. I'm out in front of the company almost every day, every other day throughout this whole period, making sure that people are communicating, they're hanging out still,
Yeah.
But I think by human nature is we always thrive off each other.
Sure.
And that's clear for me even during this period, that there's times during the day where I wish I could walk around and talk to somebody. So just trying to build those rituals into a virtual experience is stuff that we've been spending a lot of time on.
Awesome. Well, one of the kind of shared traits you guys all have, in addition to just being great guys, is you all are venture backed. And so I'm wondering, and by the way, by some of the biggest names in the world, respectively, each of you, I wanted to see, is there any key insights you're getting from your respective funders or maybe even your partners that you could share?
Yeah, I would say, I can go ahead, I mean, I think there's a lot of, can you hear me right now? Yeah, you can hear me. I think there's a lot of just discussions going on right now as we work with investors or board advisors to the company, is just there's a lot of scenario planning and just making sure that really big focus on just making sure we have kind of a set of plans or contingencies depending on the hardest thing I think about what's going on is just nobody knows how this is going to play out and how long this is going to last. So it's just making sure we're really kind of tight to the belt and how which KPIs we're monitoring, and based off of the direction or how those KPIs play out is just which plans or contingency plans do we kind of start to go into if certain thresholds are hit, whether they're higher or lower than in a positive direction or a negative direction. But I think what at least from our end, what we're seeing a lot of is I think in this scenario planning is that we should be kind of planning around or making adjustments, considering that things wouldn't go back to a somewhat normal state to maybe entering into Q3, Q4 timeframe, which may, so some people may be more of a conservative approach, some people may be aggressive. Everyone has their own views on that. But also assuming that a recession will last even longer than this situation. So just as the way the economy is going right now, it's just planning for making sure that, in the short term, I think a lot of companies may be in places where things are okay if you've raised money lately or if revenues have been in a good place, but let's take a longer outlook and look at just kind of your runway and make decisions and adjustments now to ensure that you can survive as a longer term period than just maybe what you think could be 2 to 3 months out.
Sure. Luis, any insights from any of your funders or partners?
Okay, so the things that have happened. I mean, I get all the emails for all the. I'm on all the lists for all their CEOs, and I get all the emails for that. The things that we've been asked to do. Well, I mean, just recommended to do is to do a scenario of what would happen if your revenue goes down by 30% below forecast. So we did that exercise, and what would happen if that were the case. My sense from the investors themselves is I think for some companies they're gonna try to if they were in the middle of a deal, my guess is a lot of them are trying to renegotiate deals. I don't think they're stopping to invest. I mean, what's been our case is because you can tell from the outside that our business has been going well, we actually have been approached by more investors. Sure. So my guess is what they're doing is they're just kind of shifting around. If you used to invest in travel, you're probably not investing in travel as much right now and are moving to other stuff. Sure. That's another thing. I mean, I think generally, nobody really knows what's going to happen in terms of a recession. I think, also, all our investors, for some reason, have a strong philosophical view about what to do with the government handouts.
Okay.
Should you take them? Should you not? Blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I mean,
are they in agreement, or is there?
No, they're not in agreement. I mean, on our end, I don't, we don't plan to take anything like that. I mean, it seems like, I don't know, because it changes every day, but the last thing I saw, you kind of had to promise that you really actually needed this.
Yeah.
And I doesn't seem like we should take it, because I don't think we need it, but I think you kind of had to promise that you needed it.
Jason, you seen that?
There's definitely not agreement from there. I think in general, it's the uncertainty, like the near term stuff I think will subside, but the uncertainty factor is really the piece that just no one, so like all of our conversations have been just sort of like, pretend the winter's here and that it's going to be a long winter, and that you just sort of, right, like that no one just really knows what the outside, because all this, if Corona roars back in the fall, right? Who knows? There's just so many unknown scenarios where, you know, the time and the length of recession, all of that just doesn't, there's just so much uncertainty that sort of folks are just sort of like hunker down, pretend that you need to sort of either get to break even or get to the long runway you can and figure out what that looks like. And then again, on the stimulus stuff, I think people have their own, you know, sort of different views on.
And in your space, I mean, obviously there's some instability in people actually attending school. I mean, there's a question mark as when we return, but the need for credentialing such that you provide, I mean, that actually gives some bandwidth for these teachers. Is that right?
It does. It's just a question of like how you do it in this sort of online sort of world. And so we've been trying to build a bunch of sort of that, you know, how to use sort of support teachers in that process. A lot of it is also just sort of giving people space. Because again, like you're in, and the immediate need is just sort of, you know, I sort of joke in the grand scheme of things in the education world, this will be the silver lining here is that we have now thrown education and a bunch of other industries, right, 5-10 years forward in the technology enabled world. Which will help them and is a good move in the long run. In the education world in particular, like we've also created a ton of empathy for teachers that was probably at a historic low. Sure. So turns out we should pay teachers more money and we should really help them be as best they can be. And so I think, again, in the long run, I think that will come back into help the education institution, but it's definitely been a painful, fast way to get there. I mean, most school districts just didn't have any plans in place to figure out how to do this.
Sure.
In over the course of a month, much less 3 days. So,
Graham, I wanted to ask you, what's the biggest surprise you've had so far?
I'd say that the biggest surprise for us has been we're surprisingly still bringing on customers at a pace that we expected to be, which I was shocked when what our March came out to be. I just thought it would be, you know, it would be very, very challenging. Yeah. So we, by the benefit of being in 10 cities, we got to see different regions take sort of stage and sequence at different times into crisis mode. And what that really means is like up until 2 weeks ago, Texas in our experience was pretty much untouched. It was very close to business as usual. And that started to go away a little bit. But yeah, when I saw the amount of new customers we were able to bring on in March, that shocked because I didn't think, you know, waste and recycling would be a crisis level consideration. So it's obviously encouraging for us.
Okay. How are things in New York with your business?
New York's tough. New York's very, very tough. Yeah. Right now it's, you know, I'm spending a lot of time on trying to figure that out.
Sure.
Yeah.
Ryan, what's been the biggest surprise for you?
You know, I think one of the biggest surprises was just how fast this came on. For starting there, I think would be kind of universal across everybody here and their sentiment on that. But I would say, in particular to our business, it's also just it's not that we had any doubt on our ability to execute, but I think what has been surprising is just to see is just like how, like we expected to see a much more drastic hit from the decline of rideshare activity in our user numbers and our revenue numbers, and the fact that we've been able to see the month of March go into positive territory, close to 10% in growth in revenue, and see user numbers also in positive territory has been reassuring, and it's just kind of been a reflection of the team's ability to adapt from the marketing, our marketing and messaging to users to be to everybody across the entire funnel, to be inclusive of delivery and pivot towards that, to make very quick product iterations and get features out that support the delivery drivers, but also take this entire, I think a big challenge that was uncertain was just seeing our sales pipeline, and a lot of the companies that were in that pipeline were very impacted, negatively impacted through the situation. So just being able to look at that pipeline, dissect and pull out all the companies that are going to, that are thriving in this scenario because of this situation, and target them we make money from advertising as well, and we have an ad sales team. So that's been enabled. Our sales team has done a great job of executing there and being able to put us in positive territory. So I thought it was going to be probably much worse than what it has been from the impact, just assuming just operating in the rideshare space.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. You have your finger literally on the pulse of all the data of both people being moved around and now physical goods being moved around. So I've been learning from you about this situation from your data you're collecting. And so you've also said that kind of the load is now improperly balanced over to delivery, obviously now instead of people. Yeah. Okay, that's fascinating. Luis, while we have you, what's like right now? What's the forward-looking plan? What like and including any changes you've made? Maybe next 6 months. You're on mute.
Sorry, I was muted. Well, on our particular end, I mean, we were starting to plan for an IPO. I don't know if that's going to happen anymore anytime soon. It's just impossible to tell given how the markets are. So, but other than that, I am sure that some of our employees are going to be asking whether they can work from home a little more often now that it seems like it works well. I don't know if I will cave. But I'm sure that will happen. But other than that, I mean, I don't know if we have any specific changes. I mean, I think for us, we just keep working on what we were working on.
Yeah, well, two things about that specifically. So the remote dynamic, that's going to be pervasive now that we've proven that it's at least somewhat tenable. Do you?
See, I don't buy that.
Really?
Let me tell you why I don't buy that. It's a different thing when everybody's remote than when 80% of the people are in the office and you're the one remote person. Completely different thing. And when everybody's remote, everybody's in the same playing field. But when 80% of the people are in the office, they're talking. And you're not there. So it's not quite the same. And so that's what I don't buy. I think this has proven that remote work is probably better than we expected, and I would probably be more amenable to that. But we're pretty big on not having remote employees. For us, I mean, we have different offices, and we have the people in the offices. But I don't think we're going to go, fully remote or anything like that. I mean, I don't think so.
Graham, Ryan, Jason, I kind of saw you shaking your heads on remote. That you still need in person.
Yeah, I think we don't do a whole lot of remote work. We never have. I will say that I think it's gone slightly smoother from a shift to perspective. I didn't think it was that challenging. I do think we're too early to really have our pulse on the culture piece of this thing when people are sitting in their living rooms with no change of scenery, no interaction. I'm not going to make any call on whether I think it's a positive thing. I'm focused on certainly getting people back in the office, continuing to build culture and relationships. Luis's point is spot on. The problem is when you have certain people doing something and other people doing others. So it either needs to be broad brush, completely work from home, or in my opinion, you got to get people back to the office interacting with one another.
Yeah, we went through the shift. I mean, since we got sort of Pittsburgh, Palo Alto just as R2, we started hiring up many more remote people just with education expertise, and so we sort of needed people in release that we were sort of willing to take the shift to remote. I think what we learned early on, this is probably a couple of years ago, is that unless you run everything remote first, like the way we are now, because unless you run everything remote first, then it doesn't work. And what happens is sort of when you just go, if you're in the office, you win. And if it's sort of predisposed and sort of people presume that that's the default mode, the people who get remote are incredibly, like it just gets sort of undermined really fast because they're just not connected to the actual sort of pulse. But if you sort of flip that, and even if you've got, half the people in the office, there's a bunch of collaboration, especially on product teams, it's hard to sort of replicate in there. And so that's that aside. I think what we found is as long as so almost every meeting, even if we've got, 4 people, 5 people, 10 people in a meeting, it'll still be right. There's almost always a Zoom connection in there. And so it's just sort of presumed that every meeting's got a Zoom meeting to it and everything there's just always a remote first component. And that has made it much, much easier to do that, certainly for all the operations and support side of our world. I don't think we see much sort of problem there. The product side is really where you get sort of the biggest hang-ups, which is in terms of collaboration. But then from a culture standpoint, it just starts to take we have a bunch of our folks sort of pushing on for the culture. So we run, Mafia on our Slack channel, and people love playing, things it's just, there's a bunch of ways you can do really funny sort of things. And obviously now, if people are just sort of now using all the usual sort of hacks to make it fun.
I know you guys are kind of all recently have raised is with the prospects of sort of the uncertainty. I mean, is there a need for any of you to go back out? I mean, at least you said you had some public market issues. I mean, how about the other three? I mean, you guys kind of just recently raised, so it's sort of mitigated the opportunities. Is there any consideration for that to shore things up?
I think right now is like we definitely are keeping our options open, and in all of our kind of scenario plans is just looking at, there may be capital injections that may be required in certain plans by a certain point. Yeah. But as of right now, I think just coming off of a raise, it's not something that is we're needing to rush to, and it's refreshing to get back to full operations and focus on growing the company instead of just fundraising. So I think we'll kind of have more insight on that later in the year.
How about with all this uncertainty, what are you guys doing to retain staff or even grow?
I could speak to that real quick too. Something that we've been doing, so interesting hearing what Jason was saying. It sounds like there's some collaboration in games and things like that there as well. But we've been doing, I think it's like we've been seeing a lot of people is like in being in remote, I think people are missing the camaraderie and chemistry that you have from some of these ad hoc conversations that come up, and things can tend to be, if you aren't cognizant of this, can tend to be more transactional. It's like people just reach out to each other when they need something. You don't have this general conversation that could happen between people when they go get something to eat or get a drink or things like that. So we're doing virtual happy hours every week with the team, which has worked out pretty well. Our team's not too large. We're a team of 20 right now, so that's worked out okay. I would imagine we've thought about initially using like Zoom break rooms and things of that sort, but even when we first started, we actually created multiple Zoom links and just had topic channels, and just like people would just bounce in and out of rooms, and it's worked pretty well, and it's given the 11 new hires that we've hired over the past since like February, who we've had to also onboard remotely. It's given them a good platform to kind of get to know each other and just break the ice with a lot of people.
Yeah, so Earth Day is in April. We're a recycling company, so that's a major deal for us. So we've been rallying as a business around April 22nd, and there's competitions. There's things you can do while you work remote, habit changes you can make to get back to the environment, make an impact. So there's a lot of fun stuff there. Every day we raffle lunches off to the company, and we get the lunch delivered to that employee, and we announce it. So there's little things we do that keep the employees' attention to the company and Roadrunner as a whole and where we're going, rather than, I think you have a propensity to get pretty isolated into what you're working on every day. So we try and rise them up and look at the big picture once a day.
That's awesome. How about you?
We've done a bunch of we don't do them probably every month or so. We'll do sort of remote, we call them Bloomy lunches, where basically you sign up to do remote delivery for someone else on the team. And so everybody sort of basically delivers across several time zones, delivers a meal that they selected for someone else on the team, and then everybody jumps in the Zoom and actually eats lunch together. And people generally enjoy that because it's got a little surprise factor to it, but it's sort of just a helpful way to try and get people to, look out for each other and try and figure out I generally get breakfast burritos and breakfast tacos as my sort of default view of the world, but just trying to get people sort of engaged and sort of keeping the camaraderie high.
Luis, I know you've always been, kept culture kind of paramount in your company. How's that working now?
Yeah, we're doing happy hours. Most teams do their own happy hours, so we do multiple a week. But each team, has their own cadence. We also do lunch. We try to do lunch together. There's a bunch of different breakout rooms. Basically, if you do that, you just zoom into people's kitchens and they're cooking stuff. Cool. It's pretty funny. Cool. I think that's worked out relatively well. Another thing I actually think works better remotely is our all hands meeting. It's this crazy thing. I mean, there's like, it's a gazillion pages of little tiny people all over the place, you know, little tiny images of people. But I think it works out pretty well because I think with the chat, people are a lot more open to asking questions. I think, you know, in a live group of a couple hundred or, you know, 200 to 300 people, it's hard to add, you know, to just ask a question in person. But in a chat, a lot more people are participating. So that's working out better. But yeah, one thing, you know, that we all miss is you know, going out to restaurants or bars. Yeah, I was joking before that it turns out my top 3 hobbies are bars, restaurants, and non-essential businesses. And that
It's so funny.
it's a problem.
I zoomed into the Ace Hotel the other day, hoping to see you.
Yeah, I'm social distancing.
Hey, somebody had a question. If are you seeing any vendors getting a little more flexible on pricing or terms?
We haven't. I don't know if anybody. We haven't.
Nobody. That's a no.
We've seen some. There's just some in the space. Like for example, there's a vendor that is kind of deep in the event space, and I think it's just something that all their customers are coming back to them on and saying like, hey, like there's no events going on right now. I don't know if we can. I don't know if it makes sense to keep paying for this right now. So like surprisingly, some of those vendors, although being in a tough spot, I think there's been some creative ways to work out new deals with them that whether it's like extending the term of the contract but deferring payments for some time, or but we've done that with a few vendors where we've had to work out some new deals, and just because we're just paying for nothing, no value that's kind of coming in at the pertinent time.
Sure.
I will say rent is the only one where we've probably seen the biggest, you know, sort of we locked into our Palo Alto space for another several years, but our Palo Alto one, fortunately, is up soon. And man, things have changed in the Palo Alto rent market today. So that is that'll be interesting to see how that plays out and sort of what the long-term.
Real estate's got to be the first, right? Yeah. Somebody had a question. Has any of the changes you've made made you come up with any new products, services, or channels because of these recent conditions?
In our case, we had one project that you know, most of the things have remained the same, but we very recently had started doing meetups for people to learn a language.
Yeah.
And that was actually growing pretty fast. We had about close to 1,000 meetups every week throughout the world.
Wow.
So that was growing pretty fast. That stopped to a halt. But you know, the big changes were, you know, a lot of those have moved online, and so and we see there's actually a you know, a pretty big demand for that. So that's an interesting change that team is starting to experiment. So that's about the one big change that we've made.
Wow. Okay. Hey, congrats on a million paid users. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Hey, while we have a little bit more time here, you know, you guys have obviously been nose to the grindstone in this and learning and adapting, and I applaud you, every one of you. The news is a lot better than I had actually hoped. That kind of coming into this call. So I applaud your efforts and wish you the best of luck. Any advice as you know, based on the experience that you have, for any founders that may be listening or watching? Graham, you want to go?
Yeah, I would say something that I subscribed to pretty heavily was just over communicating throughout the entire process. And I mean that with your direct reports, with your entire company, with your board, with your investors, anything that, you know, is critical or you're chewing on that something as meaningful as potential layoffs. Get out in front of that with whoever it is, even your employee base, to tell your company where you're at and what your opinion is on that. Scenarios of a plan. Get out in front of that with your investors and your board. Major KPI reductions that are taking place. Communicate all of that to the important stakeholders because dialogues and crisis moments, I think, can cause really, really good relationships and really, really good strategy. That would be my advice if I was any other founder in this position. go, I mean, listen to things like this, get perspective from other business leaders is something that I spend a lot of time on doing right now as well.
Sure. Thank you.
I can probably go.
Go ahead.
I mean, I don't know, the biggest sort of, maybe it's my biggest surprise, but probably the thing I probably struggled most with is like self-care matters a lot. And trying to figure out, like, I love to work, and I generally have terrible hours, and and I have found that, like, this has been a very hard, like, it is just like the sort of not having the normal cadence and not having the normal time has just been really brutal. I joked with my wife, we had a picnic in our front yard for the first time yesterday. It was actually a nice day, for dinner, and just like actually hung out. It was like the first day that I have felt quasi normal around, like, all right, like, you know, I can do stuff, because, you know, half the time I'll come down and, like, usually I'll plug in at like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night and have a couple hours of work to just sort of crank through and feel pretty good about it. But I'll come down and be like, I just want to go out to Westworld and, like, pretend I'm not here right now. And so that has been really hard. And so I think it's sort of, you know, the more you can be deliberate about just, like, recognizing where you fit in all this, and recognize, like, when somebody takes away your top three things, if they're, you know, non-essential businesses and bars, right, you sort of just got to acknowledge that and try and, you know, do what you can to sort of make up for it. But, you know, there's a lot of the sort of self-guilt that I think we get into in the grand scheme of things. And so trying to figure out sort of how you wrestle with, or at least how I have tried to wrestle with my own, you know, lulls has been tough, and something I just think has hit me harder than I would have expected. And so it's just sort of, when you talk to, how do you sort of get outlets to sort of get to some level of normalcy for it.
Thanks. Luis?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I would say is, you know, this is going to pass in one way or another. It may take a year, who knows? But this is going to pass. And I've heard, you know, just through the grapevine of kind of companies that were doing, even technology startup companies that were doing really crazy things towards their employees, like, okay, you can all work from home, but you have to sign this document that says that your productivity is not going to go down. I mean, that's just a ridiculous thing to do. I mean, and I would say my biggest advice would be, this will pass, and your employees and everybody that you deal with is going to remember how you handle this crisis. And so this is why, as a company, we've tried to really, really do good by our employees, by telling them things like, you know, don't worry about your paid time off. Just take all the time you need. Just don't worry about that. You know, we provide lunch for everybody at the office every day. We're obviously not doing that, so we decided to add an extra $600 a month to everybody's paycheck just to pay for their own lunch. So we're just trying to be extra nice during this time, because we know that people have a lot, you know, a lot in their minds, and I think this will. I think people will remember that during hard times we just treated everybody very nicely. So that, to me, is probably the biggest advice I would give. Just try really hard. I understand that may not be possible in some cases, and some people may have to do layoffs and stuff like that. But I would say just try as hard as possible to do right by everybody during the hard times, because people will remember.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Ryan.
I would say is, you know, something I hinted on earlier that, you know, we've been really focusing on doing is just to have a plan. And again, the hardest thing about this whole situation is just nobody knows what's going to happen. It's easy to come in and say, like, you know, be optimistic, to be pessimistic about the timelines and the scenario and how it's going to play out. But at the end of the day, even, you know, the top experts who are working on this just have no idea of how this is going to play on the time horizons here. So just have a plan around just contingencies of, if you're operating a business, if you're managing your personal finances, whatever it may be, is just knowing is what are those key kind of indicators you need to be monitoring to be able to understand which plan you go with at different times, depending on how things play out, whether things get better in the next month or two, or whether things get better, you know, 8 to 10 months from now, or even further down the future. And I would say, secondly, is I think in this scenario, it's definitely something that it's easy to, you know, we're all remote and we're all communicating and interfacing with each other through kind of these digital interfaces. And it's really easy to just kind of be very transactional. And I think it goes a long way, kind of to what, you know, everyone in the group is saying here, to be empathetic to each other and others, everyone's situations, knowing that, like, you know, we're all going through tough times here, some more than others. But you know, it goes a long way to just message someone on Slack, or to text someone or call them and just ask them how they're doing, how things are going, and how they're coping with the situation, or just to have a conversation. And because I think it's like when we started to get in this situation, it was really easy to see is just through just communicating through Slack or tools like that. It's just people just ping you when they want something, but things become very transactional. So I think empathy can go a long way in this situation.
Awesome. Wonderful. Gentlemen, I can't thank you enough. Ryan, Luis, Jason, Graham, thank you very much for your time on behalf of everybody here. Thank you all for everything you're doing to build. Specifically, thank you for your leadership. This will be recorded. I will provide this to everybody. That's all the time we have today. We'll be doing this hopefully on a weekly basis, but please, again, on behalf of everybody, thank Ryan, Luis, Jason, and Graham.
Thank you for organizing
Thanks,
this.
Raul.
Thank you for organizing.
Thanks, Kit. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.